Hey guys, it's Sarah from Just My Typewriter, and I bought another Holy Grail typewriter. So I was lucky enough to find this typewriter on Facebook Marketplace for $20. It's been a while since I've bought a typewriter off of Facebook Marketplace. I find most of the listings in my area are getting more and more expensive. So when I find something for a good deal, I usually message them, and especially on this typewriter, because this is a Hermes 3000. This is a pretty well-liked typewriter, and after the Tom Hanks appearance in California Typewriter, a lot of people started looking at this model as a pretty desirable model. All the Hermes machines sell for a lot. I've been lucky enough to have a Hermes Ambassador in my collection before, so when I saw this one listed at least within an hour of driving distance of me and listed for pretty cheap, I thought I kind of hit the mother lode. Now, I was really concerned after messaging the seller because he said he was going to leave it outside overnight because I couldn't get there till the next day, and that I was just supposed to leave money in a coffee can. I was so anxious that this was going to be sold out from under me or someone was going to steal it, so I asked him to cover it up and that I would be there the next day. I went and picked it up. He was standing there when I bought it, and he mentioned that tons and tons of people had been messaging him after he accepted my offer, offering him hundreds of dollars. Now, I was really lucky that he didn't sell it out from under me. He totally could have, and those people offering him hundreds of dollars recognized the perceived value of a model that is this desirable, but what they didn't know was that it needed a lot of work. So I was excited to take home my little seafoam green Hermes, and when I got it home, I started to realize there was a lot of damage on this and some unforeseen things under the hood. The first thing I noticed when I got it out of my car and put it on the table was that it reeked. The scent was so bad. It has all this foam padding on the inside of it, and stuff had started growing on the foam padding itself, and it just smelled awful. Not just the old mothballs in the closet kind of scent that you get out of a lot of typewriters, but the kind of smell that you need to have an air purifier next to. You need to keep it under a box so it doesn't fill up the scent in your entire apartment. So I had to take it apart, and the thing that I decided to do to cut down on whatever was growing in there was to spray the foam padding with white distilled vinegar. This is a trick I learned from my bag rehab hobby. If you have mold growing on the inside of leather bags, the thing that you do is spray it all in distilled vinegar. It doesn't ruin the finish, and it kills anything growing in there. Now, I don't know what was inside the foam padding, but I know it stunk. So I covered it all in distilled vinegar, and then eventually also went back in with vodka. This is a scent eliminator. Also learned that from bag rehab. If you have a lot of smelly things, you can coat the whole thing in vodka, it'll dry out, and it won't stink anymore. Now, obviously, I only did this on the foam padding, not the inner workings of the machine itself, but that took care of the first problem. But the second problem I noticed was that there was tons of rust damage on this machine. You can see it externally on some of the paint, but when you get into the insides of this machine, there's just lots of rust. Now, rust is indicative of a machine that has been left uncovered for a while, if it was left in a damp environment like a basement, if it had water on it at any point. Things get old, they rust, and rust is really damaging to a typewriter. Because it has all these little precise movements inside of it, the second you get rust in the way, it really impedes how it operates. And as I went to test this machine for my first little type test of it, I did notice that the carriage wasn't advancing. So I knew I had some internal problems in addition to that rust. When you are working on a machine and you need to do repair, the first thing you need to figure out is how to disassemble it. And I was stumped. So thankfully, there are lots of repair videos associated with the Hermes 3000, and I found a ton of really helpful resources during my repair process. I will link below all of these videos, so if you're working on your own Hermes and have similar problems to what I had to deal with, I highly recommend all of those resources. So I went through and watched a bunch of these disassembly videos. The first is by Hot Rod Typewriter Co. I highly recommend his repair videos. They're super helpful, and he did a full disassembly of his Hermes 3000. But the thing that I ran into trouble is the platen and the carriage. I wanted to take off the carriage of this machine because I figured there was something wrong in the mainspring. Spoiler alert, there was. But I didn't know how to do that, and I couldn't intuitively figure out how to take it apart. So if I were to take apart a Royal machine, for example, in order to get to the bottom of the carriage, I would have to take out the platen. So I tried to take out the platen of this machine. And the thing I didn't know about this machine is that it has a variable line spacer in the platen. That is the difference between the soft roll that has no clicks, and when you click it in, it'll click into lines. It allows for you to advance the paper in between spaces. If you're not lining up appropriately, it allows for you to click out of that variable line spacer, get it to the right place, and then click back in. But that is a mechanism that is in the actual knobs of the platen, and I didn't know how to do that. Thankfully, I found these really helpful tutorials. This first one is from Phoenix Typewriter. He was working on a Hermes and he broke up the repair of this into several different videos. In this first video, he shows how to remove the platen knob on the left side, which has the variable line spacer in it. It's got this little extra section that has two little fins on it. And when I pulled them out of the machine, I didn't know what they were, but thankfully there was a video out there to help me put it back in when I finally figured it out. The second really helpful tutorial I found was from Dale Haddon. I'll link this as well. I found this on YouTube, and it showcases not only how the variable line spacer works, but also how to take it apart and put it back together. So I watched these two videos a ton and was able to get the platen removed after several days of trying. But after I got the platen out, I couldn't get any closer to the mainspring itself, and I figured I'd have to take off the carriage to also get off some of this external casing. The thing about the Hermes carriages, and I really do like this, is that they are coming out of the machine as a singular unit. I thought this was so fascinating on my Hermes Ambassador. It had two little bolts on the side. Once you take those out, you can lift off the entire carriage mechanism. And that's really helpful because the carriage is attached to the mainspring or the drawband, and this allows for you to kind of divvy up where you have to do your repairs, and you don't have to do this really complicated dance of trying to get the rails to fit back on something after you've disassembled it. So it was really helpful that this had an easily removable carriage, which it does. The problem though is that I could not figure out how to get that off. There are two little screws on the back of the machine that have little tabs on them that hold the carriage in the correct position. But I didn't know this until I watched this video by Unplugged Typewriter Co. And this was, again, a very, very helpful tutorial, just really easy to understand and follow. I must have watched this video 50 times in taking off the carriage and putting it back on. These two little screws, you loosen them until the tabs turn sideways, and then you should be able to center your carriage and pull it off. Now the trick is to make sure that your drawband is off of the full carriage and hooked onto a different part of the mechanism just to keep it all together in one unit. So they have a cool little paperclip trick in that video. I highly recommend that you watch the tutorial if you are working on your own Hermes machine. But after I'd taken out the carriage, I then had to figure out what was wrong with the carriage, and there was a lot. The main symptoms that were happening on the typewriter was that I couldn't get the carriage to advance. Now typically, if your carriage isn't advancing, there's a couple things that you can kind of troubleshoot to see what it is. The first thing I would say is to set your margins all the way out to the sides. If your carriage seems locked, it could be that it has a locking mechanism on it, or that your margins are set to center, and that's blocking your carriage from moving. It took me a bit to figure out the margins on this guy. These are magic margins, which I don't like very much. That means that they are non-visible. You have two unmarked buttons on the sides that'll help you set where your margins are. So I fiddled around with these for a while, and supposedly the margin system on the Hermes 3000 is notoriously complicated. I was very lucky that mine was still intact. I played with the margins and I still couldn't get the carriage to operate correctly. The next thing I looked for was some sort of locking mechanism. Now there is one, but it wasn't engaged, and that wasn't what was causing the carriage issue. The other thing that I found kind of interesting was that the space bar would advance certain things, but the keys themselves weren't really moving the carriage at all. That then leads to several other options. It could be a cleaning issue, that you need to flush out something and get that star wheel or that inner piece starting to move, or it could be that there's something wrong with your mainspring, or your drawband, which is going to be that little string that goes from your mainspring to the end of your carriage to provide the tension to get your carriage to move back and forth. Now the mainspring was on the machine and the drawband was still attached, so it hadn't snapped in any way. That's usually what I'd recommend to look for, because the drawband is an easier thing to fix than the mainspring, but in my case it was the mainspring itself. What you want to feel as you mess around with this mainspring is some sort of coil on the inside, either wrapping around the center or loosening around the center. And often, if your mainspring is functional and there's nothing wrong with it, when you take off the drawband, it's going to rapidly spin back. That's the coil unreeling inside the casing. In my case, the mainspring didn't move at all, which could mean several things, a break in the mainspring or something else. So I removed the mainspring from the unit, I took off the drawband, and I figured maybe there was just some oil or buildup inside the mainspring. That could be something that people thought, oh, maybe if I throw some WD-40 in there, it'll loosen it up. So I soaked the whole thing overnight, and it still didn't have any tension after that. So I moved to the next step. I opened the casing and then followed this tutorial by, again, Hot Rod Typewriter to replace the inner workings of the mainspring with the insides of a different mainspring. So I opened the casing and looked at it, and it was just pieces of rust and disintegrated. There was no remaining pieces of the mainspring in there. It just kind of looked like dust. So I had to scrape this all out of the casing and then figure out what I was going to do to replace the mainspring. I thought about just taking a working mainspring unit and putting the whole casing on there, but the thing about the mainspring units is they are kind of specific in size and how they fit in the gears of everything else around them. So that meant I had to replace the inside of this, that actual spring inside the mainspring unit. So I found this mainspring that I had actually taken out of my Parts We Are Memory Keepers typewriter, but the problem was that the width was not right. So I then went to another parts machine in my collection. I was like, what am I gonna do? My mainspring is broken. Guess who has a typewriter lamp? And guess what still has a working mainspring? So maybe we can figure out a way to take it out of there and put it into the Hermes. Will that work? We don't know, but we can try. The height of these two casings themselves look to be pretty similar, and you don't want a wider mainspring in there because it means you can't cap it back together. So I was lucky enough that this mainspring from my Skywriter lamp project actually was the right size. I had to open the casing on that Skywriter mainspring and then remove the inner spring and then rewind it on the inside of the Hermes mainspring casing. Now again, I followed this really helpful tutorial, and he is so much braver than I am, but it really did help me kind of be able to visualize what I had to do to get that mainspring in there. I will say it did take me several tries to figure out how to get everything in that casing and get it at the right tension. But after I had put all of that casing back together, I had to put it back on the machine. Now once attached to the carriage unit, I had to reinsert the drawband, which is the string. I was able to keep the original from the Hermes itself, and then I have to make sure that I provide the right amount of tension to the unit itself before hooking that drawband back on the end of the carriage. Now good news, Dwayne from Phoenix Typewriter has lots of videos about reattaching drawbands. I highly recommend those. He actually had one related to a Hermes machine, so I used that in reattaching mine. And the idea here is that you spin the mainspring in the opposite direction of the drawband to provide that tension. So when the drawband is attached to the carriage, it reels up on the mainspring. So usually it takes like 8 to 10 spins to provide the right amount of tension before you reattach the drawband. And I am not an expert here. Please don't follow. This is a tutorial. That's why I'm providing you with all these resources that helped me. But as someone who considers themselves to be more of a novice or a hack when it comes to typewriter repair, I was pretty happy with the results of this. Yes, it took me a lot of tinkering and testing, but the fact that I was able to get a mainspring that provided any tension at all to this drawband was pretty exciting. Now here's the problem. Even though I knew my mainspring was at least providing tension and that I had the drawband on it correctly, I put it back in the machine and I still couldn't get the carriage to advance past a certain point. Again, I went back and tested my margins. Maybe I'd hit them along the way. I tried to see if there was anything impeding the rails along the way, and I just couldn't figure it out. When I'm in these situations, I often post on the Typewriter Repair Facebook group to get advice from other collectors who might be able to see something that I'm missing, and I always send a video to Lucas over at Typewriter Chicago because he can tell me exactly what's wrong on just about every machine that I've messed up along the way. So I sent him some videos of the carriage stopping, and he sent over some ideas. Things like flushing out different segments, and the one thing that he mentioned was I probably don't have the whole carriage unit on there correctly. And he was right. I took this carriage out maybe 10 different times and slotted it back in, and you really need to have the carriage at the exact right height to be able to close those tabs that we removed to remove the carriage. I played around with it and just couldn't get it to operate correctly. At the same time, I was also still watching some of these tutorials by Phoenix Typewriter and Hot Rod Typewriter Co., and I found this video from Phoenix Typewriter where he mentions the importance of the actual inner workings of the machine for holding the case on. And you have these little finned feet that slide little tabs back and forward to, I don't know, grip the machine's casing to the machine itself. In looking at the fins, if you have one on one side that's bent up from getting damaged or dropped in shipping, it can actually cause your casing not to sit right on the machine and cause your carriage to stop working. So I saw this video where he had the fin kind of bent up on the one side and he just tapped it back into place with a hammer. I went and looked at my machine without the casing on it, and wouldn't you know, I had a bent fin on one side. So I went through and took a hammer and tried to mold that back into place and get it to sit straight. So when that casing is on there, there's nothing causing the carriage not to operate. I think somewhere in between doing that little hack and getting the carriage on correctly, I was able to get the carriage on there and get the keys to actually type past a certain point on the carriage. So that was kind of one side of the repair. But as I had the carriage off of this machine, I also noted that there was a ton of rust on the inner workings of this machine. And again, rust really impedes how a typewriter operates. So I had to go through and do some rust removal. Now there's several ways that you can do this. I tend to opt for a wire brush to remove rust on most things. I did a good wire brushing of the inner workings. My shift basket, for example, was kind of frozen up, so I did some PB Blaster on that and then wire brushed it and removed it to be able to move my shift basket. I also found that there were several springs that had just rusted through on this machine. And I had that exact same problem on my Hermes Ambassador. And I had to go through several iterations of finding the right length and weight of springs in order to get my shift basket to work on that Hermes Ambassador. So in the case of this machine, I went through, found the rusted springs, and tried to find one-to-one replacements from my little stash of parts. And eventually I found a couple springs that actually fit and just replaced those rusted springs entirely. Rusted springs can cause a lot of issues on your machine, so it's definitely something you want to replace if you can see them and if you have a parts machine to work with. I went through and also cleaned the keys and did my normal mineral spirits cleaning on just about all of the inner workings of the machine. So I was able to get the carriage working, the mainspring working, some of the rust removed, just enough to get it to operate. And then it was on to the cosmetics. Now when I get a typewriter, I often leave it in the original state or don't mess too much with the outsides of it besides cleaning it with either simple green or some sort of car wax if it's a glossy black finish machine. In the case of this machine, I did want to do some testing because as you know, the Hermes color matching has been an ongoing mission for me on this channel. Now several years ago, I ran into a Facebook post which mentioned that the nail polish Sally Hansen in the Insta-Dry line, Time is Money, was a perfect match for the Hermes 3000 paint. Now as a nail polish collector and color match enthusiast, I got really excited by this concept, but when I saw the Facebook post, I didn't have access to a Hermes 3000 to actually test it. I just went and bought and kept it in my collection. But over the years, I've tried color matching nail polish to typewriters because a little bottle of nail polish can be a really helpful tool in just painting some of the chips on a machine. You want to protect the edges so it doesn't chip any further, but I wouldn't recommend it for painting whole patches on a machine. I did try previously to paint match or color match on my Hermes Ambassador, and I found several options that could be good but not exactly perfect for the Hermes Ambassador. But after getting my Hermes 3000, I noticed that the color on this is just a little bit grayer than the Hermes Ambassador. That was more of a mint and this is more of a sage. So I wanted to go through color testing again. I went through my collection and pulled out the usual suspects. So we have Sally Hansen, Time is Money. This is the one recommended on the Facebook group. I also found later another good option for this is Essie in the Quick Dry line in the shade In the Modem. And then for my own personal collection, I found a few other colors that might be good dupes for the Hermes color. There's this one, Sinful Colors in Eucalypta. Now this one is a scented polish. It smells like eucalyptus. Why is that necessary? I don't know. And then I also have 2 custom shades in my collection that I've gotten over the years. I got this custom shade from Blank Beauty. They allow for you to color match to a photo. I tried this when I got my Hermes Ambassador, and it was close on the Hermes Ambassador. And then I also have this custom shade from Orly that I got when I was matching my Smith Corona machine in my collection. I kind of kicked it out of the running of this one pretty early because it was too green. And then I took my 4 shades and went and tried to color match them to the machine. Now when I'm color matching, I'll try to find things that are close, and then I will paint swatches of them on an inconspicuous location. The other thing to keep in mind with nail polishes is when it dries down, it can change color slightly. Often they turn out to be a little bit darker after they dry. So I painted all of my swatches. The first one I tried was Time is Money. This is the one that I've seen suggested on the Facebook group as a good dupe, and I found that this one was just too green, at least for my Hermes 3000. I then tried the Sinful Colors color, and I found this to be a little too light. Eucalypta is just too bright of a color, and then my custom Blank Beauty shade was just too blue. So the closest match I found was the Essie in the Modem color. I'd seen this also suggested previously. Is it an exact match? No, but it might be really difficult to get an exact match because every machine's paint is going to change and have different colors to it depending on how much sunlight it's had, depending on what basement it's been stored in. The variance here on the colors can be so wide from machine to machine. So what works on my machine might not work on yours. I also think that Time is Money has recently been discontinued, so it's not always an option for other people unless you find it online. So this isn't an exact science, but for me, the Essie and the Modem was the closest I could get to actually color matching the machine and do some spot treatments on the sides. So we repaired the mainspring, put it back together, did light cleaning, did some paint restoration. Now it's time for a type test. I hear a lot of people talk about how much they love the Hermes line and how much they love their Hermes 3000. Now there are a few different models of the Hermes 3000. This is the curvier design as opposed to the media or the boxier design of them. And I've tried Hermes before, at least my Hermes Ambassador, and they're smooth typewriters. I do like that about them. I found in my Hermes Ambassador that the keyboard itself was just too wide for me. Now I am currently a Hunt and Peck typer. That's just how I use typewriters, not computers. I know that's not the preferred method for using these machines, but for me, the Hermes was smooth, but just not the right keyboard side on that Ambassador. I did eventually rehome my Hermes Ambassador, and that went to another collector out there, and she's so happy with that machine, so I'm glad it went there. On this one, I found that the keyboard width was a lot better for my fingers. I think that it's a much better size for what it is, and the typing on it is rather smooth. Now mine can be hindered by the fact that there is still some rust damage on the inside of this, and it's not a perfect repair. The mainspring in it is not the mainspring that belongs on the machine, so there could be some issues there, causing it not to be the smoothest typewriter ever in typing experience. I think this machine, unfortunately, is hindered by how much love it has from other collectors. And I've seen Facebook posts about this as well as on the Antique Typewriter Collectors group. There's so much hype around the Hermes 3000 that if you actually get one and test it, you expect it to be such a magical experience. And if it's not, or not like miles above some of the other typewriters in your collection, it may feel slightly disappointing. And I like this machine, I'm going to keep it, but it wasn't the magical, transformative Hermes experience I was hoping to have. I think it types fine. I think that it's a really good typewriter. I like some of the features on it, as well as the color and the designs. I think the way that Hermes does the inside of their machines is so different than how American machines are built. It is wildly different to work on than a Smith Corona or a Royal. And I think that parts of it are so ingenuitive. Things like those tabs to hold the carriage on. I was fascinated by the removable carriage on my Hermes Ambassador. They also try to put some interesting features on here, like the integrated line variable spacer. And I think those are all really cool. I also know that the Hermes can have a wide variety of typefaces as well, and I know that's something that's also desirable. But is it better than my Adler J3? I think I might like my Adler better, and I might also like my Smith Corona Clipper better, but that could be because I've had them longer. Again, typewriters is all up to personal preference, so it could be that maybe this isn't my top #1 machine, but it could be someone else's, and I do understand the aesthetic value that is often placed with this machine. It's very similar to the Olivetti Valentine in that way, where people look at the designs of that machine and love it, but I've heard horrible things about the typing experience of the Olivetti Valentine. It's a form over function kind of deal, and for me, I really prefer function, although I love the color. The other thing that I learned in doing this repair and this video today is that it's really important for me either to take notes while I'm doing the repair or film the video directly after I've finished the repair. I bought this machine in the early summer. I finished it within 2 weeks of buying it, and it has been 3 months since I filmed this video. I completely forgot 90% of the things that I did on this machine because in between I've worked on so many others, and I think that that makes it more difficult to talk about the experience after the fact. I had no idea after I was working on that machine that I had trouble with the platen. Didn't remember that until I went back to check the footage before filming this. So I also learned a lot about the creation process in this. I have to film them closer to when I did them because I've already covered up the trauma that was replacing the mainspring on this machine in my brain. So that was my experience on the Hermes 3000. If you have a Hermes 3000 in your collection or you've typed on one, let me know your thoughts below. And are there any other typewriters in your collection that you have that same form over function issue with? And as always, if you have more paint color suggestions to try, I want to try them. I am obsessed with trying to find the perfect shade. So if you have some more options, let me know in the comments below, and maybe I can do some more paint comparison videos because that really scratches the itch in my brain that matches a lot of my hobbies together. If you are tackling a repair on your Hermes, I have linked below all the videos that I used in my journey. Now, I don't make repair specific videos. I do more story times about repair. These guys really make fantastic, easy to follow content when it comes to working on a machine, and there's such value in this video content on the internet. So if you are looking to repair your own machine, I highly recommend those channels and those videos I have linked down below. If you're interested in more typewriter content like this, I do some other videos on this YouTube channel as well as on my Instagram at just.my.typewriter. And I thank you all so much for watching and remind you, you're just my typewriter. You know, the other thing that I found kind of difficult on this is how to open the case. This is not an intuitive system. There's a little metal tab that you have to push to release these two brackets, and that took me entirely way too long to figure out. And I don't feel like the case fits very well on the machine, but that could just be me.